Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, wow, we are back on the Investigative Journal on this Thursday. It's already March 22nd, 2018 day on our calendar. We're into the second day of spring, I am told. And you can kind of feel it in the air, don't you? People start perking up a little bit. But anyway, today, wow, what a show we have today. I'm going to rely on a guy who puts out what's called Israeli news. I've been watching him for a while. And before Barry Chamish passed away, I used to contact Barry regularly to understand what the heck is going on in Israel. And Barry was a journalist there, also an American Israeli who lived in Florida when he passed away not long ago. And he was a great resource. Go to his website at barrychamish.com. And boy, he filled me in on a lot regarding the real situation in Israel, who the traitors are, just like we talk about here in America. It's a very similar situation there, where the Knesset, controlled by the Vatican-led New World Order, similar to how the American Congress is as well, and also the hierarchy of the president in Israel as far as being in the Vatican camp, and as well as the American president. So, let's talk a little bit. Hey, before I get into it, go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. You can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Now, for a long time I had a website called Arctic Beacon, and I kind of morphed into this site. And it still hosts the Investigative Journal radio show, which I've had on starting out in 2004 or 5. And right now we're listener-sponsored. And I have a number of subscribers. It's free to subscribe. And I'm asking this month for all my subscribers to at least send in $10 to keep me on the air, okay? It's a tough job here trying to do this when advertisers run from the truth. And you know as well as I do, they will not put a show like this on the mainstream. And the reason they won't is they don't want you to get to the truth. And if they did, it would be a hit show. I know that for a fact. Because when I used to be on some of the controlled opposition radio stations on the internet, which I didn't really understand back then, when I started talking about this subject, it became one of the top shows on their station. And boy, they had to counter that quickly. And they did. But what I'm getting at is people are starved for this information. And if it was allowed to go, isn't that crazy? They say there's freedom of speech in America. But I know that doesn't exist. They just tell you that. The Constitution says that. But is there? No, not at all. You have freedom of speech as long as it's in line with the powers that be. As long as you're in line with the Vatican-led New World Order and its goal of a one world order, one world religion, then you have freedom of speech. But if you sway from that, you don't. Just like you have freedom of religion in this country, right? You think you do. But, not too long from now, you're not going to have it, because just as Islam, for example, let's talk about Islam. If you look at Islamic countries and Islam around the world, one of the second largest religions next to its founder, the Catholic Church, the Vatican. You look at Islam around the world, and you'll find that depending on the amount of Muslims in a country will depend on what your freedoms are. And if you're in a predominantly Muslim country, your freedoms are gone. Sharia law is there, and you violate that, and you know what happens. And that's what they do. They come in like a lamb, and they become a wolf. Now, in America, they're a very small minority, so they try to blend in. But you can bet there are radical extreme Muslims at work as we speak in this country. And you don't have to look any farther than a guy by the name of Fethullah Gulen. And also, go to Islamburg up in upstate New York and see what that's all about. radical Muslims carrying weapons on a 30 to 40 acre plot of ground, and no one kicks them out. But at the same time, they're talking about taking away guns from, innocent Americans because of their staged attacks on schools, and now these pipe bombs or these bombs going off in Austin, Texas. So that's what you're seeing here. Now, what is so Israel? The goal really is the Pope to take over, to gain Jerusalem again. And in the 90s, the Temple Mount was purchased by the Vatican. Many people don't realize that. And when is this going to occur? And I ask you this question. Why don't we pull back the curtain? We're going to listen to Israeli news for a little bit today. And we're going to talk about Middle East war sets the stage for Gog and Magog. Now, do many of you know what Gog and Magog are? Rome puts the U.S. and Russia on lethal collision course. Who really is Gog? And we're going to talk about that today. And I want to ask you another question. How near is the final battle for Israel? It's very important according to Bible prophecy. Now, the United States and Russia have been pitted against one another to destroy nationalism and make way for a Vatican-led New World Order. Now, remember, we've talked much about Alberto Rivera, the Jesuit priest who was assigned task to infiltrate many Protestant churches in America before he became a born-again Christian and started to tell the world, at least America, the truth about the tensions of the Vatican and the Jesuits in this country. But Alberto Rivera also told the world that Cardinal Bea claimed that the Vatican created Islam to wipe out true Jewish Christians after they refused to join the Catholic Church. Now, once again, Rome turns to their Sunni sons to carry out the conquering Jerusalem before anybody can mount they have to do this before they can crush the two superpowers, the U.S. and Russia. And China's got to be involved in this as well. Now, Middle East war setting stage for Gog and Magog. The source I'm going to use is Israeli News Live. I'm going to listen to this guy for a little bit. And we're going to examine the conditions in Syria, what appears to be a soon battle between the U.S. and Russia that will weaken the nations to open the battle for Erdogan, a NATO member, to work with the Arab nations and remaining NATO states to take Jerusalem for the Pope of Rome. Okay, this is quite interesting. And I want to turn to the Israeli news right now. Okay, shalom to all of you, and here we go.
I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. And friends, we've been seeing all types of comments coming up on the channel. Quite a few of them just flat out saying that we are Russian propaganda or a Russian shield. And I think facts are totally skewed on people that think like this. But let me just kind of clarify, and we're going to really get into this today, because I realize many people have the false conception that Russia is Gog of Magog, and that it is the Russian Empire that's going to come down and sweep through and destroy Israel. But it's actually to the contrary. And there are two schools of thought on that, and I do believe that Erdogan, President Erdogan of the Turkish government there, is the very one that will be the Gog of Magog, or the Magog, the military force, along with all these Arabic nations, and whatever NATO members are going to participate with him will actually be the ones that come against Israel. And as I put up here, this was the meeting between President Erdogan and Pope Francis that took place here, I guess a week or so ago. It's been a little while back now. Turkey's Erdogan meets with Pope Francis during Rome visit, and the Pope, of course, gives him this gift of a peace prize, so to speak. It says Pope Francis gifted Turkey's Recep Erdogan an angel of peace during Erdogan's visit to the Vatican. And I thought to myself, how absurd could that be? Now, the two don't get along on every issue, but one thing they do see eye to eye on, and that happens to be none other than Jerusalem And it says, attention then turned to the situation in the Middle East with particular reference to the status of Jerusalem. It added, despite previous disagreements, the leaders found common ground on Jerusalem after the U.S. unilaterally recognized the city as the capital of Israel. Now, again, it's a good thing that President Trump recognizes Israel as Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but at the same time, there are a lot of other forces working in the background that are definitely have a different agenda altogether. And this is something we're going to find out as we dig into this from a prophetic standpoint today, and as far as Russia and the United States. My biggest issue that I've had when it comes to Russia and the United States, knowing that President Putin is not no angel by no means, but nonetheless, he has an agenda. He has a desire for the gas and oil in Syria, just like the United States does. But really and truly, when it comes down to the end of the day, these two nations, these two superpowers are being pitted against one another, and Rome, and behind the scenes, is the one pitting these two together to fight it out, to bring an end to the two nations, the two most powerful nations on the earth, to destroy nationalism. How many times have we shared that with you here on Israeli News Live? With the insider that was close to Erdogan that said one of the New World Order agendas was to destroy nationalism. This is why they want to disarm America. And so many people falling for this whole idea. Illinois, from what I understand now, is saying that they want to disarm any 18 to 20-year-olds getting semi-automatic weapons. They are getting ready to totally take your weapons away and do away with your constitutional rights. And there's a reason for that. The New World Order cannot have any opposition. Once they destroy nationalism, they have to make sure no one else has weapons to be able to fight back.
Okay, and you know, on our show, I echo his statements and have talked many times about how the Vatican and the New World Order, the one and the same, want to basically destroy the freedoms of America, get rid of any kind of nationalistic idea. And how they're doing it with Trump, I may add to what this gentleman is saying, is they're finally pitting the two against one another. They're raising up the last hope, so to speak, of nationalism in America with the Trump following, pitting it against the half of the United States, or even a little more, who are all globalists now. And when you think about the youth in America and the lifespan of most of the baby boomers, who many of them fall into this category of nationalism, and many of people over 40 do, you're seeing a youth movement in America which is pushing people away from nationalism into a global mindset, and basically teaching them that America is bad, America is imperialistic, and it shouldn't be supported. We should support a one world government. Wouldn't it be nice? That's what this whole idea is about, open borders. That's what this whole idea is about, pitting the last vestige of American nationalism under Trump against what should be called the Democratic Globalistic Party. So let's get back to Israeli news.
On a New World Order agenda. So everything, all the cards are playing into position right now. And unfortunately, too many people are going to be duped into this and never realize what happened from the start now. And of course, when it comes to the United States and inside of Syria and stuff, all this is nothing but a show. It is only it's just being played out, friends. We're being fooled from the very beginning. And there's a lot of people out there that are trying to get you to go along with the idea that we have to destroy Syria, and that this is part of the agenda. What we're supposed to do is to destroy Syria. Maybe what I should do, just real quick, out of argument's sake here, let's look this up, all right? Moses dividing the land of Israel, it's actually Joshua that did it, between the tribes, and we want a map of this. We need to look at what was given to our people, and we can't go by the fact that God gave Abraham the promise from the Nile to the Euphrates, because Abraham's children also include the Arabic people, as well as the house of Israel that has been living in the Middle East as well. Many of them as Christian believers now. All right, so let's quickly, if we can find an image on this real fast, some of the ancient biblical lands, and here's one right here. And this is something that really kind of gets me, is because it is totally rejected the idea of what land belongs to whom. All right, and I don't know whether or not we can see this land well enough here, but Jordan and, of course, parts of Syria are in the occupied lands of Manasseh, as we can see here on the map. Let me see, that's not one that you can see well enough there. Here we go, right here. We have up near the Galilee, which is considered to be the Golan, not Damascus whatsoever. Mind you, if you look at the map here in this northern area, Damascus is completely outside of that. But we have Manasseh right here, which would be the Golan Heights, belongs to Manasseh. And Dan, we have Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun. We have Ishkar. Of course, you have Gad, which is now part of Transjordan now. You have Reuben, also part of the country of Jordan. And what's interesting to me is they're trying to make Israel a Jewish state, but yet Judah has the southern portion of Israel, that is true. And you have to remember, besides Judah, the house of Judah was made up of Judah, it was made up of the Benjamites, which is just to the north there, which is Jerusalem area, that area there. And of course you had Levi. Levi was never given a particular land. But all the northern parts of the land that Israel is inhabiting right now actually belongs to the house of Israel. We have no claims to Syria. And in fact, even in Jordan, not the part where Reuben and Gad should have, that should belong to the commonwealth of Israel, we would say. But we were told to leave the children of Moab and Ammon alone. These are the children of Lot. It was given to them as a possession. So we have no rights to this land. All right? Syria is the mothers of Israel. And it's also the fortress of Ephraim, which were the believing Christians that have been there for the last nearly 2,000 years. And Isaiah 17 says that you will destroy the fortress of Ephraim when you destroy Damascus. All right? So we're really getting completely outside of the biblical mandate of what God has called on. Now I want to look at some of the news things that are going on so we can kind of bring things into perspective to show you what's happening. Now first off, let's just look here real quick. Amman, which is Jordanian news, it says, breaking Syrian army stopped 3 attempts by militants to use chemical weapons, according to the Russian DM. Now, this is part of the deep state agenda. I don't know if President Trump is even aware of this, but one thing I do believe that President Trump, he's being fed all the propaganda as well to get him to do a war between Russia and the United States. And Putin, no doubt, is being fed all the garbage on his end. Does he really realize that Trump, that the deep state and Trump are not maybe one and the same? I'm sure some people believe that Trump is part of the deep state. All right, I'm not going to argue the point. I'm waiting to see how this is all going to play out.
Okay, I got to chime in here. Now, from those statements, you would get the idea that Putin and Trump are unwilling dupes in this whole thing, being pushed by the Jesuits into this war. My thinking is a little bit more conspiratorial, but I believe more closely related to the truth. And that is that Putin has been given an agenda to carry out by the Jesuits, as has Trump, and they're just playing the game that they're given, the game plan they're given, to the masses of each each country. So I go a little bit deeper, and I think that's a little closer to the truth, but let's get back to Israeli news.
But truly, the two superpowers of the world are being pitted against one another. Now, speaking of that, let me take you real quick to Isaiah. I have it pinned up way over here. This is a famed biblical scripture that most people believe referred to the Twin Towers. I thought that was interesting. Actually, I know the very man that actually first originally brought that out. This is from Isaiah chapter 30, I believe it is. And we're looking at verse 25, but let's look at verse 24 and then go to verse 25 and 26. The oxen likewise and the young asses that till the ground shall eat savory provender, which hath been winnowed with the shovel and with the fan. And there shall be upon every lofty mountain and upon every high hill streams and watercourses in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers fall. Now the towers, people take that as being the Twin Towers, and it could be also prophetically speaking of the Twin Towers, because we know out of Egypt I called my son applies to both the nation of Israel leaving Egypt, coming out of bondage, as well as it applied to Yeshua when he came back from Egypt after the death of the king that was killing all the children. Now, but if we back up and we look at this, literally in Hebrew, it says, Benephah Migdalim. Migdalim is the word for tower, but it's also a word for a power, a strength. Like the Migdal Eder, as we find out over in the book of Micah. God was angry with the leaders of Israel, but in this case here, there is a falling of the powers. And when this happens, will be in the day of great slaughter. I believe it is a nuclear war between the United States and that of Russia. And it says, moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun. No doubt the battle will be at night. Now, of course, one side of the earth will probably be daytime, but you know, there is part of the time where Moscow is dark and the United States is dark as well. So, keep that in mind. So it says, moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun. The light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of the 7 days, and the day of the Lord bindeth up the bruise of his people and healeth the stroke of their wound. All right, so could this be a scripture prophetically speaking about the fall of the two world superpowers, Russia and the United States? Could be. Now, let's go back though. We started off sharing with you Erdogan meeting with Pope Francis. This was on Made for Minds is the article where I picked it up at, but I'm just trying to remember, see if they show the date of when this happened here. I don't see that date in this article, but we know it's just a couple of weeks ago, something of that effect there, not too long ago when he met with him. All right, then we have also here this article from Sputnik. Red line for all Muslims. Erdogan vows not to give up on Jerusalem issue. And watch what he says here. The Turkish president has reiterated his adamant opposition to Donald Trump's controversial decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, underscored that the ancient city is too precious for Muslims. On Saturday, Recep Tayyip Erdogan called on Washington and Tel Aviv not to make any steps that could escalate the tensions over the disputed city. Now, mind you, friends, I'm not against the Turkish people when I'm saying these things. I'm not against America when I say things about the United States. If anything, we have to thank General Wesley Clark in the United States for letting us know that there was an agenda to take down all these Middle Eastern nations. And oddly enough, think about what side of the fence they were on in the battles.
Okay, let's take a break here. This is Greg Anthony on the Investigative Journal. Go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. You can get shows going back over a decade on the Vatican-led New World Order, like I like to tell you. Also, if you're a subscriber, throw in at least $10 this month so I can keep this show going. And I'm always trying to help you out. Hemp for Health and Wealth. Get on the hemp revolution. You can either use these products, contact me at gregbeacon@gmail.com for hemp oils or hemp creams, CBD, legal in all 50 states, Canada and Mexico and 40 other countries. Or if you want to be a sales associate, contact me, gregbeacon@gmail.com. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Hi, Greg Anthony here from the Investigative Journal, and I've never steered you wrong before when it comes to talking about the truth regarding your political and social worlds you live in. And I don't plan on steering you wrong today when I say get involved in the hemp revolution, hemp for health and wealth. I know of some of the best hemp oils on the market. If you haven't tried them, you have to. And pay attention, they're lab tested. So contact me, Greg Anthony, at gregbeacon@gmail.com. That's Greg Beacon, G-R-E-G, like boy, EACON.com. And I'll hook you up with some of the best hemp products on the market. And if you want to become a sales associate and make some money selling hemp to your friends and family, do that. Contact Greg Anthony at the Investigative Journal, gregbeacon@gmail.com, gregbeacon@gmail.com.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the Supreme Jesuit Command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back quickly on the Investigative Journal. Go to my website, like I said earlier, GregAnthony'sJournal.wordpress.com. Get shows going back well over a decade on the Vatican-led New World Order. We're talking about when is this prophetic war going to break out here for Israel, for Jerusalem? And what roles do the United States, Russia, China play? And according to a lot of onlookers, one, I'm looking at Israeli News, Stephen Ben-Nun, who hosts that show, feels that the United States and Russia will soon be pushed into a war regardless of how these two leaders are trying to work out their differences. Now, I believe that that's all a stage, all a show, and that the marching orders will be given to both these leaders on how to proceed by their overseers, the real men behind the scenes, the Vatican-led New World Order. The question must arise, though, as to why. The Vatican sees eye to eye with Erdogan in Jerusalem, or in Turkey on Jerusalem, and the Turkish president is willing to fight Israel with other NATO members and as well as 56 Arabic countries. The only thing really standing in the way is the United States and Russia. And, you know that the United States has to be weakened before this onslaught comes on Jerusalem, right? So who better to do it than Russia? And you're seeing an escalation of, nuclear talk going on as we speak. Also, recent sanctions put on Russia, recent sanctions, trade tariffs put on China by Trump, all indications that a conflict is arising. So Rome, using the deep state, has pitted the superpowers against each other in order to weaken them to pave the way for this new superpower. Right. And I want to get this interview. This is a good one. If you've ever listened to Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, and he's on Mr. Ben Noon's show, and it's a powerful discussion about the upcoming Ezekiel war they talk about. And I thought we'd go to that right now and listen to Stephen Pidgeon.
So many of the things we do privately, we know that we're at a critical hour now. We've really arrived at a critical hour. And I think today we're going to have a discussion about some of the prophecy and how the prophecy plays out and what that prophecy means, because we're going to see some things that I think are going to be shocking, surprising. And again, for those who think that we favor Russia in this discussion, that's not the case at all. My favorite people on earth are Yasharel, the people of the children of Israel, the children of Yaakov, and the 12 tribes and those who sojourn with them. That's where my allegiance is. That's where it is now, and that's where it will always be. And as for the governments and in the world and what they do, well, it depends on how they respect Scripture, how they respect the Word, as to how I feel about them. And there's really no discrepancy otherwise. And they can claim whatever they want to claim. They can try to claim righteousness, but none are good, not one. And so as a consequence, but I want to begin here today, if we can, talking about this nascent Sanhedrin. And the nascent Sanhedrin have done some very interesting things. One of the most important things they've done is to issue this recent half shekel, the temple half shekel. And the temple half shekel has, of course, it has three names on the coin. It says Balfour, Cyrus, and Trump. And of course, the Hebrew name there for Cyrus is Koresh. But what we see there is this half shekel. And this half shekel is comparing Trump to Cyrus. However, I think it's important. I think the Sanhedrin are onto something here, which is that the Balfour Declaration, which came in 1917, this Balfour Declaration came in immediately after the capture of Jerusalem during Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah in 1917. So we know it was at the end of the year in 1917. And the Balfour Declaration moves ahead, and at that time, the whole of the Levant, if you will, or the Adam HaKodesh, the Holy Land, was given back into the hands of Ephraim. That is to say, the British Empire. British, the covenant man. It was given back into the hands of Ephraim, as was expressed in 1 Chronicles 5:1. Now, once it was in the hands of Ephraim, what happened? Well, the Balfour Declaration happened. And the Balfour Declaration happened in strict accord with Zephaniah 2:7 and with Zechariah 12:11, which is going to specify that the tribes of Judah, tens of Judah, would be repatriated to the coastlands first. And so this happened with the declaration that divided the Adam HaKodesh, which at that time, prior to that, was part of the Ottoman Empire. In other words, it was unincorporated. You had the Ottoman Empire being controlled out of Istanbul, and it was just kind of a giant territorial area. There was no dividing line. There were tribal sects. And there was Lebanon, of course. But a ruler was taken out to draw Syria, to draw Iraq, to draw Kuwait, to draw Jordan, and to draw Israel. It was a ruler. And they drew Israel down the Jordan River. A very important marker, because there was a two-state solution in the Transjordan. Everything to the east of the Jordan would be Arabic. Everything to the west of the Jordan would be Israeli or Jewish, the tribes of the Yahudim. Now, this was the deal that was made in the Balfour Declaration, and that is the deal that stands. The UN then tried to mitigate that deal with a two-state solution, imposing a two-state solution on the two-state solution. And should they be allowed to get away with that, they'll impose a two-state solution on what remains, until eventually you have the Jews in one block in Tel Aviv and everybody else on the other side. So the concretization as a matter of law for the state of Israel took place in the Balfour Declaration. That's recognized in the nascent Sanhedrin's half shekel. Now, the nascent Sanhedrin has also called for the tribes of Ishmael, the leaders of the tribes of Ishmael, to embrace the new temple, because the new temple is coming. This is the prophecy of Daniel 9:24. In Daniel 9:24, you see the end of that. It says, "And to anoint the Holy of Holies." It is a prophecy concerning the return of the temple. And so the third temple is expected. Now, it will not be a temple like Solomon's temple, or even like Herod's temple, but it's going to be a papal temple. We've already seen the CAD draw of it. It's nothing like Solomon's temple. It's going to be something entirely different. It's going to be a temple for all nations and an ecumenical temple. Nonetheless, I wanted to draw that initial precedent because, as we talked before, Stephen, Jerusalem, with Trump's proclamation that the American embassy is going to move to Jerusalem, at the moment he said that, Jerusalem became a cup of trembling for the whole world. Now, people might say, well, look, there's a huge oil find in the Golan Heights, maybe. There's a huge natural gas field off Cyprus called the Leviathan field. That's true, it's huge. And ExxonMobil is trying to move its platform into place over that gas field right now. That's part of why the Sixth Fleet is in that area. Now, but that's not what's going on here.
Steve, before you carry back up, one quick thought just to throw in there. One thing that people may not realize is one of the leading members of the Sanhedrin, that's Rabbi, his name slips my tongue right now, but anyway, they are trying to bring the Muslim world, but who are they trying to bring? This is a very risque group out of Turkey who's very loyal to President Erdogan, and that's Adnan Akhtar. And we've had several rabbis, including MK member Yehuda, met with Adnan Akhtar, and the Turkish consider him to be a sex cult.
Right, well, there you go. And of course, you know that Erdogan, shall we say, wades in those waters.
Exactly.
And, so what we see here, and so we know that there is nothing that is scriptural of this. The third temple arrived when Mashiach rose from the grave.
Yes.
That's when the third temple arrived. And the third temple is present. The body of Mashiach is present. And so the third temple is here, and it requires sanctification. Now, this coming temple is going to be a counterfeit temple. It's the temple of the coming Antichrist. And so the question is, who is this Antichrist? Is he on the precipice? Is the coming of Mashiach at the door? Is it at the door? I believe it is at the door.
Yes.
And I think this is what's so important about our conference today, and this is part of the reason why I was so excited when you contacted me to discuss this, because we know that as of 3 days ago, the Russians had actually encountered, it appears to be maybe a couple of French drones coming into Syria, and they took them down with missiles. And the Russian ministry came out and said, look, if there is any firing on Damascus, we are going to fire back, and we are going to destroy that which fired at Damascus. Now, it boggles my mind, frankly, that America is going to be the agent that's going to make Damascus to become a root of seed. That is what boggles my mind. And I don't know how many munitions Trump has prepared, but we do know that some of the guided cruisers, the frigates, the missile cruisers, carry some 90 nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and that there are many of them deployed. So you could see a rain of 400, 500, 800 missiles coming into Syria with the purpose of taking out all defensive targets and with the purpose of destroying Damascus and terminating the Assad regime entirely. Now, We can say, well, that's about oil because we have to get a natural gas pipeline, but I don't believe that. You know, politically speaking, Stephen, when you talk about how the West is arranged, remember that it is the Catholic Church that teaches the doxology, God in three persons, right? Blessed Trinity in three persons. And that three persons, they have created as a political reality. That is, they have a spiritual head, which would be Vatican. They have a financial head, which would be the Crown of London. And they have a military head, which would be Washington, D.C. For people who don't believe that Washington, D.C. is closely linked to the Vatican, I call your attention to the fact that our Capitol building has a cupola, just as the Vatican does, and an obelisk in the front yard, just as the Vatican does.
Okay, and folks, how many times have you heard that? Going back 12 years on this show, I've been teaching people that, talking about the obelisk in Rome, the obelisk in the United States, and the one in London. And boy, I'll tell you, it's great for me to do that because I walked by that obelisk so many times, not knowing what the hell it was when I was blind and couldn't see. And when I lived in Rome for a number of years back in the 80s. So it's really refreshing to hear other people chime in on that.
Yes. We have, and on top of the Capitol building is Ishtar, Columbia, who also sits in the harbor of New York. The Statue of Liberty is Ishtar. So we have some very interesting symbolism going on here. When Americans can actually see what it is, we can see this relationship that we got conquered by Rome right after the Civil War. In fact, the Civil War was sponsored by Rome. It was instigated by Rome and put together by the Crown in order to bring in the Catholic Church, which had been prohibited. When John F. Kennedy was elected president of the United States, he was the first Catholic president, and it was a scandal. It was a scandal nationwide that a Catholic had been elected to the presidency. Now we see 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic, and we see the Catholic institutions dominate every major city. The Catholic churches dominate every major city, and the Jesuits are in complete control of the largest states in the country. So there we are. And so when we look at this, when we look at what's happening in Syria, the Syrian regime is being taken down in order to create a chaos in the region that will allow the Vatican to control Jerusalem. It's not about oil. It's not about gas. It's not about a pipeline. It is about Rome securing Jerusalem.
Well, Steve,
you
made a very interesting point. I mean, we've talked about this before, because when President Trump became president, we both were even hopeful that we might get some peace in the world, maybe a little extension of time before judgment set in. We saw that Trump initially spoke about wanting try to work something out with Russia. But when they leaked his secret plan, state solution, the call for Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel was almost a joke, because even if you notice his verbiage when he first announced it, he still said status quo for the Temple Mount. But in the leaked part of the plan, the White House was very upset. Maybe not, maybe they intended it. But it stated in there, the old city of Jerusalem was of a national force. That goes back, Steve, to 1994, the Pope of Rome making the secret deal that Joel Boehnerman, Barry Chamish, both exposed this, the Lestapa, the newspaper, read the Petrus Romanus, the book there, those guys there, I forget, actually found the article Lestapa, that was Steve. But he found that article, Lestapa, that Joel used that showed that the Vatican and the Pope of Rome and Shimon Peres were working together, and he had swore to give Jerusalem to the Pope of Rome.
Yes, and I can tell you, if you look closely at the Oslo Accords and you date it, you will find out that it's exactly in the middle of the week between the creation of Israel in this 70-year cycle.
Wow,
so
I
people
didn't
say,
know
well,
that.
there's going to be a treaty in the middle. Yeah, there's a treaty in the middle. Right there, the Oslo Accords. And so when we look at this, and of course this reflects back on S-181, the UN resolution that supposedly established Israel. Even though the Balfour Declaration established Israel following World War I. The Balfour Declaration.
Yes.
Because you Ephraim, that is to say the United Kingdom, had the authority over the Levant, and they divided it. No one is proposing a two-state solution for Iraq or for Syria or for Kuwait or for Jordan. Nobody comes in and says we need a solution for Jordan. You know, somebody drew the lines with a ruler back in 1918, and that was that. But when it comes to the Israeli state, there's always somebody out there with a ruler saying, let's fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. Now, with that being said, and this resolution S-181, that calls for Jerusalem to be an international city. You were the one that pointed out that they were putting in checkpoints to enter the city in Israeli territory. And you know that's going to happen. You know that they're going to control it. The Vatican intends to have complete control of everything inside the walls of the old city. Right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so as we see that, because they lust after Jerusalem. And so here we have this now, but they're not the only parties at the table. So does Erdogan and the Turks. Now, it's very interesting. People underestimate Erdogan. You have to remember that when we look at the Ottoman Empire, it was called the poor man of Europe when going into World War I. Why was it the poor man of Europe? Because John D. Rockefeller had deprived the Ottomans of their moneymaker, Saudi Arabia. You know, John D. Rockefeller is the one who funded Lawrence of Arabia, you know, a British MI5 agent, to go down and to agitate with some of the most radical Islamic fundamentalists in the area, the Wahhabists. Kind of a similar program. They could have called themselves ISIS back then. And they came in and they worked for a separate state using bloodthirsty jihadist techniques to create the separate state of Saudi Arabia in 1901. They culled out, they took away from the Ottoman Empire its oil riches and put it in the hands of Saudi Arabia that the Rockefeller family could then exploit through Hebron, that is Chevron oil, right? Hebron. And so this is what was happening. And so the Ottomans went broke. When the Ottomans went broke, they couldn't hold on to their empire. So there was no lines. There were no lines there between Turkey and Syria and Jordan and all that. It was just one giant, Ottoman Empire. Now, when it fell...
This is when also the Turkish government, when they were allowing wealthy Jewish families to return to their homeland, they changed their laws because they were poor then in order to raise tax revenue, but they couldn't get any tax revenue for the peasants who were living inside of modern-day Israel, as we call it today, or the land of Israel. And so they allowed the Jewish people to return there, some of the wealthy ones from Iraq, from Iran, those places there, down from, and they purchased land, all the way down from Tel Aviv, all the way up to Haifa, and over to the Galilee. And they were just doing that in order to raise money for taxes there, but that was really, to me, when Israel became a nation. And oddly enough, when Mahmoud Abbas was opposing the two-state solution that President Trump was putting forth, he had a bunch of maps on the back of the wall showing Israel at their different stages and where their territory, supposed their territory, was shrinking. But he actually has the map of when the Jews originally first began to purchase the land in Israel from 1858 under the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you look at that, most people don't know Jerusalem in 1924 had 25,000 people total. It was a little tiny cow town for all intents and purposes. You had the old city and you had a couple of peripheral villages outside of it. It certainly wasn't today's modern Jerusalem. And you have to remember that the hand of Yah was upon that land then. It was a desolation because Yah had made it a desolation. And that's why there was no revenue there. When Mark Twain visited the place, he said, "What? There's nothing here. It's a desolation," right? And so now, so when we look at this foundation of Israel, then we can see here that there are some prophetic things happening. And not the UN did not create Israel. It was the hand of Yah that created Israel, that the timing of the repatriation of the tents of the Yahudim would be in accordance with his schedule. Now, I do not believe that the modern world knows who those Yahudim are, but there are some that are in the land that are supposed to be there right now. And we're beginning to see so many things happening because the Ruach HaKodesh is moving through certain of the Yahudim inside the land. There are people who are, teaching the gospel. There are people who are doing things like, for instance, I saw a prayer meeting in Tel Aviv where Jewish Messianic believers were facing Palestinian Christians and praying for each other. Because what is the uniting force? If it's Mashiach is the uniting force, there is no other uniting force. But in the meantime, we do have this Erdogan who is thirsting after Jerusalem. And, in 1917, we had the death of the Ottoman Empire, and they had to retreat. The Ottoman Empire retreated back into the Anatolian Peninsula, and they called that peninsula Turkey. Now, shortly thereafter, they would have this Armenian genocide. They didn't want to admit to it, but they killed 2.5 to 3 million Armenians because they believed that the Armenians had sided with the Russians during World War I.
Okay, that was a pretty good interview so far. There's much more to it. You can look for Israeli News to get the bulk of that. And I really enjoyed listening to that. I'd like to end the show by saying that besides representing a hemp company, the Investigative Journal also and myself are representing a merchant funding group called Mom and Pop Merchant Funding. You can contact me at gregbeacon@gmail.com because we're always trying to help you out. And there are a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, even cannabis businesses, that need funding, and banks are turning a blind eye. So contact me at gregbeacon@gmail.com if you're looking for an unsecured loan. 98% of people who apply get it. And you only have to be in business for 6 months. Show your bank statements for 3 months. And depending on your monthly gross, will tell me how much you can get, how much money you can get. And boy, sometimes it's really needed. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.